Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always is Danny Gillette, and we're back here on this Monday morning for another episode of the podcast, and we're going to discuss the future of Nebraska basketball after, another difficult loss to Iowa, which knocked the Huskers out of the Big Ten tournament, knocked them out of contention for the NCAA tournament. So we'll talk about what went wrong this season, the future for Fred Hoiberg. We'll talk on some off-season rumblings for the Nebraska football program and a couple of recruiting nuggets. Before we do that and get into everything, hit the like button. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button, get into the comment section. And Danny, how are you doing on this Monday morning?
I'm good. This daylight savings time is messed with my body clock a little bit, but I'm adjusting, so I'm all right.
Yeah, I'd be doing a lot better if Nebraska, hadn't, laid an egg yesterday on Sunday against Iowa in a must-win game and ended up, that Nebraska needed to win. Basically, the winner of that game was headed to the Big Ten tournament. Nebraska lost by 15. They started off pretty well. They grabbed an early lead, but Bryce Williams never really got anything going. He only had 7 points, only attempted 2 free throws, didn't make a three. Iowa, I thought, did a great job defensively. Sam Hoiberg ended up with way too many shots, I thought, and it just didn't work out. The defense gave up 11 3-pointers. Iowa made a lot of their shots near the rim, so it was just the defense fell apart like it has all season, and Bryce Williams just ran out of gas, I guess is the simplest way to put it. So what were your thoughts on what transpired at the Vault on Sunday?
You said it earlier just now. Bryce Williams never got anything going, and when Bryce Williams can't get it going for whatever reason, the entire offense is non-existent, and that's been a major problem, honestly, throughout the entirety of the season. I mean, there's been some bright spots like Berkey Boy Tunsil really playing well against Ohio State, but ever since his injury, he's been playing inconsistent. So there hasn't really been a consistent scorer outside of Juwan Gary and Bryce Williams, and when those two either get in foul trouble, in the case of Gary, because of his defense, which I like because nobody else plays defense, or Bryce Williams, when he just can't find his shot, then you run into problems. And that's exactly what happened partly yesterday. Bryce Williams never got anything going, and as a result, the entire offense stalled out.
Yeah, there just isn't, Andrew Morgan has been, provided some low post presence this year, but, outside of that, there hasn't been, any. I mean, Braxton May hasn't scored inside, Berkey struggled this year. So they really missed Rink Mass inside in terms of scoring and also, the ability to create some shots. And they did create some decent shots. I mean, Sam Hoiberg had some open shots. He just, didn't make them. He made a couple, but was like 2 of 7 from 3, where Bryce was 0 for 3. And, it was disappointing, but you could kind of see it coming. I think the most disappointing thing about all of this is that Nebraska, all they had to do was take care of business at home, and they lost 4 straight games at home to end the season. And really, they lost because 6 of 8. I mean, because they beat Illinois and Ohio State at home, but they lost before that, to Rutgers and USC. So there was 6 losses at home.
UCLA too. So I don't know. I mean, it was just so weird.
Yeah, I mean everything. After that UCLA game, they were 12-2, and it seemed like
good.
everything was trending up. But injuries happen, and I don't know what this too much was kind of put on Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary on this team, and unfortunately, the injury with Rink Mast happened, and some of these transfers just didn't, deliver the way that we expected. Raleigh Wooster was a disappointment. I mean, if we could go back, Nebraska probably would keep Jamarcus Lawrence for a season, if they could, and he was a good defender and shooter. And so sometimes, you get buyer's remorse when you go to the transfer portal because Raleigh Wooster just, was not it. And he, didn't play great defense and didn't really provide much, offensively. And not that he was supposed to score a lot, but it's, throughout his career, he had been, at least a playmaker, and he didn't do that this season. So it was, that was disappointing. I am hopeful that Nebraska will get a postseason bid. I think the NIT is probably, going to be extending them a bid. There's also the new tournament called the Crown, which is a 16-team tournament in Las Vegas. And basically some of the idea was to try to get some of these Power 4 programs, to this tournament to kind of, essentially it's an attack on the NIT, and they're trying to kind of make this a new thing. So I think that they'll get an invite to one of those 2 tournaments. And Fred said that they would accept it, which I think is still a positive thing. I know Nebraska fans are not going to be very excited about that, but I just would like to see these guys play again, especially, it was hard to see Juwan Gary coming off the floor, crying on senior day. That was tough to see because he's given so much to this program. But I still think that, you know, making a run in the NIT or whatever would still be worthwhile accepting if they get offered that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely would be worthwhile accepting, and I know it would be hard to convince Nebraska fans, like you said, and quite honestly, it would be hard for me to even get excited about it. But I mean, you start 12-2, and then you just absolutely implode, basically once the calendar turned, and just so disappointed overall this season. There was so much potential with this team, and there we thought this team was going to be better than last year's team when we were doing preseason predictions, and it just never was able to materialize that way.
Yeah, I mean, there were guys that were supposed to be defensive upgrades, and they just didn't really deliver in that way. We thought that they were going to be Nebraska would be upgrading its defense was a major issue. Last year against Texas A&M, and even if you look at some of the other games they lost last year, but it remained a big issue, and I think they need to look at their scheme because they give up way too many 3-pointers, and it's like I understand, they want to limit 2-point attempts, but the way that they do it, they just give up way too many threes, and their transition defense is just terrible. And it was like, Fred mentioned, that one of the big keys was going to be transition defense, and late in the second half, or in the first half, it just totally broke down. And Nebraska, or even it was like midway through the first half, they had a decent lead, and then it was like, they were in transition and they let Iowa's, best 3-point shooter have a wide open three. And it was like, then the next possession down, they let Peyton Sandford have a wide open three. And it's like, you can't give these guys wide open looks like that. And Nebraska just continually does that. The shot that Minnesota hit to win the game was wide open. And so, yeah, it's frustrating because a lot of those, you had a lot of close losses, Ohio State, Michigan, Minnesota, and they really needed to find a way to win some of those games. But to not even make it to Indianapolis, I think is pretty crushing for this program.
It is pretty crushing because, again, I thought this team had more talent than they did at this time last year. But, the thing about the Big Ten conferences, I would almost rather give up easy twos than wide open threes because it seems like every team, with the exception of Nebraska, has at least 2 or 3 good 3-point shooters. So, I mean, when you look at the lack of being able to rotate on defense and their struggles on defense stemming mostly from the inability to defend the perimeter, I'd almost rather them focus on that. Let the big guys have whatever they want inside and just focus on guarding that perimeter.
Yeah, I mean, at least, I don't know, you need to have some type of rim, protection inside.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do, but the defensive scheme doesn't seem to be working that well. Maybe they just need more athletic players. I mean, I think that was, part of it is they just, didn't have the athleticism at times, and you could see that. But it's frustrating. You feel like you should be able to play transition defense, or I'm still frustrated by the Minnesota game where it's like,
Yeah.
all you had to do was, at least locate your guy. And, it was like Andrew Morgan just was sitting out there in left field with there's 5 seconds left on the clock. And it's like, find your guy, man. Like literally you're watching him to come down the floor. It should not be that difficult to, at least to contest the game winning shot. Nebraska didn't even contest it. The guy was wide open. So, I mean, like that's just, those things are frustrating. But I mean, the defense was, good for part of the season. So I don't know. It might be just a personnel issue, but they have some major work to do in the transfer portal, and they have Rank Mass coming back, Connor Sejan, Janowski, but they're going to have to find some playmakers to replace Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary.
And Connor Sejan needs to be a little bit more efficient with his shot because, as good a shooter as he is, he really struggled down the stretch this season, and he's going to need to be able to hit his shots consistently. And I know that sounds very simplistic and like a no crap type of thing, but it was frustrating watching him shoot at times this season.
Yeah, it was. He was really streaky and could have been more consistent. I think he was still, in the top 10 and on the Big Ten in like 3-point field goals. So I mean, he did have a pretty solid season, but they need more help. They need more. You can't have one guy on your team who's like a designated shooter. And I know
I think
Juwan
being a
Gary.
starter next year might help him be like find his rhythm because it is hard coming off the bench and trying to find that 3-point rhythm.
Yeah, and it just would be, he needs to expand his game a little bit more offensively, and they need Nick Janowski to be ready to play next year. I mean, he's he's been their best high school recruit of the past few classes, and he needs to be, as a sophomore, hopefully ready to contribute and start. Maybe not even start, but at least needs to be ready to contribute. And hopefully Rink Mass will be back to himself, and they need to find some, like, a big time wing in the portal, and they whiffed on some guys, the past 2 years, a lot of guys that went to high school in Nebraska. So that tells me the NIL game for the basketball transfer portal needs to be upgraded, and hopefully Troy Dannon will allow that to happen. And I guess let's have this conversation, because a lot of Nebraska fans, I've seen a lot of chatter about Fred needs to be fired or Fred Hoiberg needs to go. So I don't, I definitely, I've made my point pretty clear. I don't think Fred should, be fired. Maybe a little bit of pressure, but what do you think? Should Nebraska consider firing Fred Hoiberg? Should he be on the hot seat going into next season, or what do you think about Fred Hoiberg's future with Nebraska?
First off, the fans saying Fred Hoiberg should be fired. They thought Matt Rule should have been fired. They just want everybody fired who doesn't deliver instant championships. And there's a certain ceiling with the basketball program, and I get there's a certain level of expectations. I think Fred is still a good coach, but I think next year is going to be crucial for him. If he can't at least make the NCAA tournament next year, then I think maybe he should be fired, honestly, because he's been here for quite a while now, and he's had some success. NCAA tournament appearance, last year, even what looks to be a winning record this year. So, I do think asking him to be fired right now is a little bit premature, but if he struggles next year, then I don't see a reason to keep him.
Yeah, I guess to me, I think that they should be around 20 wins. I think 20 wins is, whether you're making the NCAA tournament or not, I think would be, a somewhat successful season. I mean, you look at Nebraska dating back to, since we turned to this century, the 2000s, Nebraska has won 20 games 3 times. So, I mean, that tells you, where this program's at. They won 23 games last year. In 2017-18, they won 22. And in 2007 and 8, they won 20. And they have, before that, it was 98-99. So, like, that's the level of success you're looking at with this program. I mean, there's been not that many even winning seasons. I mean, this would only be, if they do take a postseason berth, this would only be the second postseason tournament they've played in since, 2018-19. So, like, I feel like they are making progress. This is 3 consecutive non-losing seasons. They were 500 2 years ago, and they're going to have a winning season no matter what happens here. So, I mean, that hasn't happened at Nebraska for a long time. That's been since, just looking at these winning percentages here, that's been since 2006 to 2008, that they did that. So Fred Hoiberg has still, even though the season hasn't gone the way that, we've all wanted it to, or that I'm sure that he wanted it to, he still put together one of the best 3-year stretches that Nebraska basketball's had in decades. So, I think that as a school, as a university, they need to decide, like, hey, are we really going to, invest, with these other programs in the Big Ten in basketball or not? And, I think that they're doing that. I think Fred does have resources, but he needs more, especially in the transfer portal, because in basketball, football, you're talking about, a 10, 15 player class. In basketball, it's like 3 to 5. And really, it comes down to 1 or 2 dudes. And Nebraska needs to find a couple of dudes, in the transfer portal. It would be great to find a point guard, and it would be great to find a wing that could replace, Bryce Williams, and then bring in some other guys that they already have on this roster. Connor, Gavin Griffiths, hopefully can have a heartbeat next season, can do something. But yeah, that's going to be the question going forward. So, I don't think that Fred should necessarily be on the hot seat, but I mean, like, if they make the NIT next season, like this year and next season, I still think he would be, the best guy for the job. But if they, like, miss the Big Ten tournament next year again, then that, in my opinion, would be, time to look at him. But I'm not saying if he misses the NCAA tournament, I don't think he necessarily needs to be fired. But just because it has been so hard to win at this program, and since the Big Ten, this program has only made the NCAA tournament twice. So, like, I mean, I get that we all fired Tim Miles, but there had to be some, fans that had some buyer's remorse after, because it took a long time to get back to this point. And I'm definitely not ready to restart. I know that this season didn't go the way that we wanted it to, but I still believe in Fred Hoiberg. I believe in his ability to coach. And I think, he needs to work on the roster management side of things, but I do think that he needs more NIL support in order to make that happen and effectively. So I think he's done pretty well with what he's been given so far.
They collapsed this season. I mean, they really did collapse this season, and that's something that really worries me. Last season, obviously, they had the success. This season, they started off 12-2, and once they got into Big Ten play, they just collapsed. And that's why I would even think about putting them on the hot seat if they don't do anything next season, because, it wasn't like they were able to, get some sort of consistent success once Big Ten play started. They had a couple streaky runs here and there, but you look at, the loss to Penn State, the loss yesterday, the loss to Purdue in January, and there were just times where they collapsed. And I think that's what's most jarring to me, to be honest with you. So I don't think he should necessarily be fired outright, because I do think there is a certain ceiling with this basketball program, but this season is definitely one to keep in the back of the memory if you're Troy Dannon.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if they, have like a losing season next year, or, are one of the worst, teams in the Big Ten, I mean, I think that, missing the Big Ten tournament, I think would definitely, lead to would make that conversation justified. But outside of that, I think Fred Hoiberg is still the best man to lead this program. And I know that these past few games have been frustrating, but they have to upgrade this roster. And at the end of the day, they didn't do a good enough job in the transfer portal last offseason. And, unfortunately, that's just where it is. They just didn't, at the end of the day, just didn't have enough talent. And, Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary had to do everything. And, it just got to be too much. And, the guards that they brought in just didn't make as big of an impact. I'm sure that, before the season, I don't think that, Fred Hoiberg and the staff probably thought that Gavin Griffiths was literally going to give them nothing. I mean, he contributed nothing this season. I mean, for a guy that played for another Big Ten team and was a near 5-star recruit, I mean, he should have been someone who had a pretty significant role off the bench and was a guy that does have ability. And so I don't know, man. I have no idea what the heck happened there, but he is someone I thought was going to have a role on this team. And for him to not even get off the bench was pretty surprising.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be on the team next year, to be honest with you. So we'll see what happens. But the next month or so, well, I mean, once the tournament gets over, but the portal shopping is going to be critical for Nebraska. I mean, absolutely critical, because you've got Rank Mast and Connor Sejan and Nick Janowski. And then after that, it's like, who do you really have Berkey, you've got Berkey, but
yeah.
There's not a lot of core pieces to build around. So Fred's, going to have to rebuild this thing on the fly, which is, what a lot of teams are having to do. So it's not like they're alone, but, when is the last time they've had a high school recruit, come through this program and stay for 4 years? It's been quite a while.
I'll have to look that one up, actually, because I don't know the answer off the top of my head. But yeah, no, they're gonna have to, I think, identify their most important positions and then just go out and attack. I think finding a true point guard is going to be extremely important for this basketball team, because they haven't had one in so long. And, I think trying to find a level of, a post presence, kind of like a Braxton Me type guy, a little bit of someone who can just fill the lane and have touch around the rim, because you talk about a little bit of disappointments. I thought Braxton Me, again, I know I mentioned him a little bit earlier, but I thought he was a little bit disappointing this year as well. He did have some nice stretches, like the game against Ohio State and Northwestern, when Berkey went down with the injury during that time frame. I thought he played well, but by and large, I thought he had difficulty at times just trying to, A, find a role, and B, even scoring around the hoop. So getting a post presence that will be able to score and rebound and, things like that, is going to be important.
Yeah, for sure. That we need to get some more help in the post, some rim protection, and some help in the backcourt would help a lot. So we'll see what happens. I do think that this team will have more basketball to play this season. So we won't find that out until after the NCAA tournament selection process has gone through. So kind of it'll be a waiting period for Nebraska basketball fans for about a week, and then we'll see how it all shakes out. But I do think we'll see this team play another game this season. I don't know if it's going to be at home, because like if they played in the NIT tournament, like I'm not sure that they would get a high enough seed to host a game. So potentially that would be a one positive if they could host an NIT game. I mean, that would be cool to get some of those guys another game at the vault. But either way, though, whatever happens, it's been a disappointing season. So let's move on to some football talk. Not a ton of stuff. We'll have some more kind of breakdowns on spring football and some storylines here in the coming weeks as we move closer to spring practice. But there have been some, there's been some buzz. They're going through, off-season workouts. The football team posted some shots on social media of guys doing mat drills and working out and doing whatever. But last Friday, Sean Callahan of Husker Online did report that, Cortez Mills has been turning heads, the 4-star freshman wide receiver. It looks like a guy who's going to be able to play, right away and make an immediate impact, which isn't going to be easy, with this wide receiver room being as talented as it is. So Cortez Mills making a move. Marcus Watson Trent is another guy. And he, in terms of transfer additions, I think is one of the most underrated ones. The Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year. You look at his stats, he's had over 111 tackles in each of the past 3 seasons. So like he's a tackling machine. He's got like 165 solo tackles in his career. He also last season had like 4 forced fumbles. Like he was a playmaker. And I think, he's Zach Thomas. He's only 5'11", but like this dude can play. And he's showing that early on in camp. I mean, not camp, but off-season workouts.
Yeah, no, I remember when he played against Nebraska a couple of years back, and he had like 10 tackles. So I mean, he has a nose for the football. He can find the football and immediately make a play. He's very quick, very aggressive, and I think going to be a perfect fit for this defense. And you talk about some of the young playmakers in addition to some of the transfer guys that this defense has, and this could shape up to be a pretty solid unit. And then I think honestly, a guy like Cortez Mills, I wouldn't be surprised if you see him play a lot in this upcoming season, even as a freshman. He's just so explosive. He has that playmaking ability, and he's not a guy you want to leave on the bench.
No, definitely not. I think he's been compared to Devontae Smith by Matt Rule, the guy who won the Heisman Trophy for Alabama, and he's a home run threat, and he has done it against really high level competition. So, yeah, I think I definitely expect him to get in the mix this year. And you look at the wide receiver depth chart, man, it's loaded. Dane Key, Isaiah Hunter, Harvey Gilmore, Ja'Cory Barney, and then you've got Isaiah Mosey, also Demetrius Bell, who was hurt last season, Quinn Clark. You just have a lot of talented wide receivers. So Jeranian Bonner too. People forget about him. Keelan Smith even.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of reason to be excited about that wide receiver room. And defensively, I really like Marcus Watson Trent, and I feel like even he may not even start on this defense because of they've got Shavers, they've got Javin Wright, they've got a lot of really talented linebackers, but I feel like he's going to be a guy who's going to end up playing a lot and is just going to rack up a bunch of tackles. Like it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up seeing the field more because every time he's out there, he just makes a damn tackle. And but I like Javin Wright and Shavers too, though. So you look at him, those 2 guys plus Watson Trent. I think, man, those inside linebackers are really good too. And you've got Christian Jones and Dawson Merritt as well. Willis Begahey on the outside, Dason McCullough. So I really like this linebacker crew.
Yeah.
And, gives me the worms and fuzzies to hear that Marcus Watson Trent is, looking good, looking the part so far.
This linebacker group is probably, maybe the second strongest positional unit on the team after wide receiver. And, they just have playmakers everywhere. They have guys with speed. They have guys who have a nose for the football. And I think they're going to all fit this defensive scheme really well. And so it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how they mix and match the linebackers and how this defense kind of feeds off that linebacker play.
Yeah, I actually really, looking at this defense, and it's interesting because the defense, if you look at like returning production, I think the offensively Nebraska is pretty high up there, like in the top 40, but defensive returning production, according to ESPN, they're like 75th, or they're pretty low because they lost quite a few guys from last year's team. Not only guys to the portal, but Ty and Nash, and they lost some longtime starters there. But man, you look at their defensive depth chart. And obviously, it's going to be a little bit different, but I mean, Keanu Davis, Elijah Judy, Ben Popple, Williams Noweri, Cameron Leonard, all defensive linemen. We talked about the linebacking core. And then, Andrew Marshall and Sayer Wright, Hartzog probably as the nickel, Deshaun Singleton and Buford as the safety. So I don't know. I just feel like that there's a really, solid group of players here coming back. And I think that John Butler is going to, have a good group of clay to mold this season.
I like this defensive unit more than I like last year's defensive unit, if we're being honest. I feel like there's a little bit more variety in personnel, and I feel like this scheme will fit these guys better.
Yeah, and I like. I know we lost some pass rushers from last season, but when you've got McGahee and hopefully Cam Leonard can take a step this year, that would help.
Yeah,
But
that'll be big.
Keanu Davis, Williams Noweri, I think that there's enough guys, and Dason McCullough, I think, is really going to make an impact as a pass rusher. I think that's the reason Nebraska got him, and they're like, hey man, like we're going to let you rush the passer. That's what NFL teams want. So if he like wants to make money, like he needs to have a good season getting to the quarterback, and that's what Nebraska needs too. So let's make that a positive thing for everybody and get Dason like 5-10 sacks and get him some money and get an all Big Ten season out of that guy.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what he was able to do at Indiana, and then obviously he spent time at Oklahoma. I mean, he is built to be a pass rusher. He's got a high motor, and again, it's that nose for the football. He wants to get after the quarterback. He wants to rush the passer. So, what better way to do that than to have a role for him where he can focus on mostly only that. And I was really excited when Nebraska picked him up, and I think he's going to be a great addition to this defense.
And it will be interesting to see. There is the transfer portal in the spring. It'll be interesting to see if they try to maybe add, a nose tackle type. But I think that they might, think they can get by with, Van Poppel and Elijah Judy. So we'll see. I mean, those guys are both, in the 300-pound range. I think Elijah Judy had a lot better season last year for Nebraska. I'll say that in terms of like his impact and what he was able to do, run defense wise. So, we'll see how it works. I mean, it'd be nice to add a 330-pound guy, but probably not going to happen. I don't know what they necessarily would add in the transfer portal. I know some people are still like, oh, we need offensive line help.
Yeah.
And sure, I mean, maybe another tackle, but I mean, if you look at what they've got coming back from last season on the offensive line, I mean, I know Loftoski's coming back from an injury, but you've got, Justin Evans, who was a starter.
Yeah.
You've got, Gatula, who started basically all last season. Then you've got Rocco Spindler, who started double-digit games for Notre Dame. Elijah Pritchett, who started, double-digit games for Alabama, and Loftoski, who started a lot of games. And if he's not healthy, you've got potentially Turner Corcoran. You've also got Sam Sledge. You've also got Grant Bricks, Gibson Pyle, and then maybe even, you might even have Turner Corcoran and Prohashka too, if they can stay healthy. I mean, I know that's a big if, but it's not like Nebraska's relying on them for anything more than depth. And if those guys win healthy, they have played effectively too. So I feel like there's a lot of, quality options for Nebraska beyond the starting five.
Yeah, I feel like they have a lot of depth, and I know those names maybe might not pop out to fans or are noticeable to fans, but there is a lot of depth there. So I think we're okay on the offensive line. I mean, if they added one more lineman, I wouldn't be upset, but I feel like they have a solid – they finally have some solid depth at the position for the first time, and boy, 5 years?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Sam Sledge is going to be an interesting guy. Do they because maybe he could be, if he could show that he's the center, maybe they wouldn't need to move Justin Evans. But I think that's going to be what happens is Justin Evans is the starting center. And then that other spot's going to just come down to, whether it's Sam Sledge or whether it's Loftoski getting healthy or Turner Corcoran, Grant Bricks maybe even. So there's a lot of, I feel like, quality options for that last guard spot. And yeah, another, like if an all-conference left tackle is available and they could get him, like sure, I'd love to get him. But I do think that Gunnar Gatula did a solid job last season, and if he can, continue to play better, I think you could do a lot worse than him as your left tackle.
I agree, and part of it's not just finding instant impact players. after difficult seasons from previous players the year before, especially if they're freshmen. Part of it's just letting them develop, and I think Atul is on the right track.
Yeah, I definitely thought that he, did a solid job, and maybe he's not like a first round pick ever type of offensive lineman, but I think that he did a solid job last year. So I feel better about the offensive line probably
Yeah,
than most. The
yeah.
running back room I still feel pretty good about. Wide receiver, tight end. I'm hoping that they're bringing Carter Nelson back to that position.
I'm kind of interested about the tight end room, to be honest with you, because if Carter Nelson is not healthy, then I wonder, you know, what the depth is beyond Nelson.
Yeah, it's trying to think here.
Ian Flint is Keelan Smith.
Yeah, they have Keelan Smith as listed more as a wide
I could see
receiver.
Smith kind of moving back because I don't know how many more wide receivers we need. Um, I could see Smith kind of moving back to tight end, possibly.
Yeah, that could possibly happen. That's still the bummer part about, I know everybody was like happy that Fedoni left, but I really, this team could really use a guy like Thomas Fedoni or, Borkature, whoever.
I'd rather have Borkature back, to be honest with you. I was also happy to see Fedoni leave.
Yeah, see, I just don't get that. I mean, I just think Nebraska fans underappreciated Thomas Fedoni. But there's Luke Lindenmeyer, AJ Rollins,
Forgot about
you
AJ
know,
Rollins.
Mac Markaway, but he was hurt last year too. Eric Ingwerson. So there's some guys, but nobody that's really, ready to step into this role. I'd say, Lindenmeyer, I guess, if it's not
Yeah,
because he played in all 13 games last season. He had 5 catches for 50 yards. So he's probably going to take over the um Borkature role. He started the Pinstripe Bowl and had 2 catches. So I would say Lindenmeyer and Carter Nelson, if he's that move tight end, are probably going to be the guys this year that would get most of those snaps. I don't know what Carter Nelson's status is for the spring, but he did play a lot on special teams, and that makes me feel like they trust his blocking and stuff enough to play him at tight end next year. Because really, it's like they're just not that he doesn't have a future at wide receiver, but yeah, there's it just makes more sense to play him at tight end where I think his skill set could be better utilized.
Mac Markway, former LSU recruit, former LSU commit. I mean, he was regarded as a very talented player coming out of high school. So if he can bounce back from injury and even be halfway decent, that would be big because he was able to play really well when healthy. So I'll be interested to see what he does this year.
Yeah, that would be he ended up being another guy basically as part of kind of the 2025 class, how that ended up working out, 2024 class. So he'll definitely be in the mix. I haven't heard a ton about him. I think he tore his ACL again when he got to Nebraska or something. So
Yeah.
at any rate, though, still a quality piece that could be, adding some more depth next season. And let's close out the show with some recruiting nuggets. Not a ton of stuff happening on the recruiting trail over this, since Friday when we did our last episode. But in-state tight end Isaac Jensen did release his top 10, and Nebraska was, among that list. And, there's some other, pretty impressive schools on the offer sheet, but it seems like Nebraska is the leader with Isaac Jensen. He's coming for a visit this spring and a visit this summer. So, guys released the top 10, but I feel like Nebraska is near the top, and he's one of the 2 in-state offers for the 2026 class. And I don't know if that's going to get expanded, but I feel like they're in a good place for his commitment.
I do too. And Nebraska, as much as people are frustrated with the in-state recruiting lately, they've been able to do a good job of landing the top recruits in the state when they've needed to. So that's a positive trend, I think. And Isaac Jensen is a very good football player, very good tight end, and I think will probably make his top 5 or whatever, and then it's a battle from there. And I think adding Jensen to this program and to this roster would be another huge get.
Yeah, and he's, his recruitment hasn't gone national like, say Carter Nelson's or whatever, but he does have a pretty, extensive offer sheet. So, Nebraska's done a nice job with him. He's out of Millard South, ranked 649th overall, but, like Missouri is on there, Auburn, Colorado, Florida State, Illinois, Kansas
Good
State,
list. Yeah.
LSU, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Wisconsin's also offered him. So, he's got a nice little offer sheet going there. So yeah, I feel like they've done a nice job with with Isaac Jensen, and then the other recruiting nugget I was going to talk about. This is from this is just reported by Sean Callahan, but he mentioned it anyway of Husker Online that Davion Bonwell Whitty, who was one of Nebraska's 2026 commitments, probably not going to be part of the 2026 class. There hasn't been any communication, according to Sean Callahan, since Garrett McGuire left. So Garrett McGuire probably played a key role in that recruitment, and you could tell that Dana Holgerson just recruits a different kind of player than Garrett
Yeah,
McGuire. So I think
yeah,
don't be surprised if he's not a part of the 2026 class, and I wouldn't don't take that as a bad thing. It's just probably both sides are going to go their own way.
yeah. Completely, completely different wide receiver room and style compared to what Nebraska had when Garrett McGuire was here. So like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if he was not a part of the 2020 six class either. It's just again a change in philosophy, kind of not what Dana Holgerson wants, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's just again, players are different, coaches are different, schemes are different. So I'll be interested to see who they have to fill that spot, because it seems like they always have a backup plan whenever they lose a recruit or a decommitment. So yeah, I'll be interested to see where they go, and especially in terms of taking wide receivers in this class, how it is kind of structured, because they have a lot of visits this summer, and I think those visits will be important.
Yeah, they don't seem to be as chasing as many wide receivers in this class, which probably makes sense based on their wide receiver room. But let's see, just looking at some of the guys that they've offered. They're not really getting it. Jabari Mack is one guy that's coming for a visit. Ryan Mosley is another one. So there's a few guys that are that they're kind of trending up with, but it definitely doesn't seem to be as big of a priority as it was in the past. And you still want to get a couple of guys for sure,
Yeah,
but I don't think it's going to be as they don't need like 4 wide receivers in this class. So we'll see how it goes. But Ryan Mosley, definitely a guy I would like to see them get, and but he's going to be a tough one to get out of Georgia. So we'll see how that works out. But overall, I think they're doing a nice job in 2026, and it's just going to be interesting to see how many they take. 15 to 20, and we're really seeing the impact of that with because a lot of these in-state guys that they probably would offer as walk-ons, they're not offering now. So I think in-state recruiting we're going to see that trend way down over the next few seasons.
yeah, I agree, and it's just the nature of the business, and I think these last 2 classes in particular were very heavy with talent, and although there's going to be talent in, obviously the future classes, of course, it's maybe not as heavy, so I think that'll play a role in it too. And I'll be interested to see what regions they recruit most moving forward and how they attack it, especially as the transfer portal emerges as, kind of a dominant source of recruiting in college football.
All right, you guys, before we wrap it up, just really quick, the wrestling team took second in the Big Ten wrestling tournament. Ridge Levitt won the second consecutive Big Ten championship, so that was of note there. So quite a few guys going to the NCAA tournament. The baseball team lost their weekend series to Washington. They did scrape a win on Sunday, so they're 5-8, but not the best start overall for Will Bolt's team. The softball team is 19-6 though, so that was good. They went 4-0 this weekend, but just Northern Iowa, Northern Colorado, and South Dakota State. Big Ten play starts this week for the softball team with the 3-game series at Ohio State. So we'll start to learn a little bit more about them, but hopefully baseball can get things going because it's been a rough start for Will Bolt's crew.
Yeah, there's still plenty of opportunity for them to get things going, but the initial trends and the initial returns have not looked good. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll see if they can find that late season magic that they found at the end of last year.
Yeah, and it's tough, man. You lose your Friday night pitcher in college baseball. That's
Yep.
pretty essential. So,
Yep.
even more than probably a Major League Baseball team because, that Friday game is really critical. So hopefully some guys can step up. Jackson Brockett had a good day on the mound on Sunday, but a lot of road games they got to play at USC and UCLA over the next few weeks. So going to be critical to kind of keep your head above water for Nebraska baseball. But yeah, and we'll be monitoring things. We'll have another episode this week, and we'll maybe look ahead at some more spring storylines for Nebraska football. So make sure you look out for that. Make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get in the comment section, and as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.